I'm here today with Elizabeth Koutrelakos, and you are a trauma therapist in the Teton Valley, but you also work with corporations and you're an outdoor wilderness enthusiast. So I am really curious to hear your story. Like, how did these things come together? Why psychology and then why trauma?
Okay. Well, I started my degree when I was 18 and I just got a bachelor's in psychology because at some point I knew I wanted to be a therapist. But I was pretty turned off by my classes and I didn't really like school at all. It wasn't really for me. And I graduated college and started working in the outdoors. So I worked on the trail crew for the national park in the Tetons and in Alaska, and really, really enjoyed that. In Alaska, I worked with a lot of veterans. They were on my crew. And in the Tetons, there's just so many different folks working in the field. Um, how I started this journey as a therapist, and when I decided I actually wanted to be a therapist again, I was 24 years old, and um, at that point, I had been backcountry skiing for 6 years or so. I had a great mentor. And when I was 24, my close mentor died in an avalanche in the Tetons. And it was really highly publicized because he was skiing with Steve Romeo, who had this blog about backcountry skiing. And so all eyes were kind of on them and looking at what mistakes they made and why. So that was my first loss in the mountains. And it was pretty gripping. It was in 2012. And there was a really great community that was very helpful. And then after a couple months, they kind of went away, but I was still grieving. So that was maybe my first adult grief. Um, and after that, I kept skiing. That next year, I was really afraid to ski, but would still go out with folks and adjust my ski plans accordingly. And in January of 2013, I was camping kind of at a backcountry cabin in the Tetons and um, skiing with my boyfriend and a couple friends. And my boyfriend died in an avalanche. And that was really difficult to wrap my brain around. There was basically a rock in the middle of a meadow that caused a very weak layer and made the avalanche happen. So there was a degree to which, like, really wrong place, wrong time. And that made it really hard for me to go skiing because in the avalanche of my mentor, there were some factors of new snow and warming. But with my boyfriend, just the fact that you could die so easily made me really scared to go out there. So I kept skiing for a month or so. And then I went climbing. I went on a big climbing road trip. And so most of the time I was camping and I worked seasonally for the park. So that didn't start until May. And I just noticed that my body was doing a lot of strange things. There were times where I would feel like I was on drugs, like just there's periods of that time where I've met people and hung out with people for weeks at a time, and I just don't remember it at all. I wasn't doing drugs, but I was just in this completely different state. My digestion was really off. I had diarrhea, headaches. My hair was falling out. I started getting gray hair. At that point, I was 25, so that was pretty young. And I was basically just surviving. And So about 6 months later, my uncle, who is a clinical psychologist, saw me. I was in Jackson and working, and he was like, "You have PTSD. Like, this is, uh, you need to get treatment for this because this is not safe." At that point, I had crashed my car twice, um, just completely blacked out in the middle of the day, just ran into someone um, on the highway. And I kept getting into these car crashes. And again, I wasn't tired. Like, it was the middle of the day. I was just completely out of it. And I didn't even know. Um, and there wasn't a lot of, in the mid 2000s, there really wasn't a lot of talk about mental health or stress injuries or how trauma gets stored in your brain or body. So there wasn't a whole lot of connection. And so luckily, there was someone that kind of saw um, what was happening and gave me the number of a therapist who specialized in EMDR, who I called. And I saw them that summer, and a lot of the symptoms went away. And a lot of my symptoms were somatic. So with my digestion and stomach aches and diarrhea, and um, like my body was just like basically just ridding itself of whatever it could. And yeah, EMDR therapy was really helpful. I was also kind of confused as to how it worked or why it worked. Um,
It's kind of confusing.
so it was very confusing. And I'm like, I don't know, like
Yeah.
I was tapping and then now this doesn't happen anymore. I also, after I did EMDR, I was able to do stuff like cook, which before that, I couldn't even compile a grocery list. I would just eat a lot of bacon and cookies because it was just what was on hand and it was really easy and I knew I had to eat. But I was living alone at the time and it was, you can't work and do it all. So it was really cool. I'm like, oh, I feel hunger and actually I can go and shop and do these things after EMDR. Um, so that got me interested in EMDR again. I tried out some different, I was looking at long-term career stuff, and I tried the paramedic thing and firefighting thing, and that wasn't really for me. It seemed to be more of helping a lot of people when it was too late, and that was really hard. Um, and then I just knew I had to do something, and I figured, well, I'm going to be in grief for a while. I might as well be doing something else. So when I'm done, like with grief, I had no idea what grief was at that point, but I'm like, well, if I'm going to feel bad for a while, I might as well go to school and have something else to do. So I kind of went to grad school and got my license in social work. And now I'm a therapist. And I got certified in EMDR right when I got my provisional license. So I've been doing it since 2016.
Can you talk briefly about EMDR, what it is and why it's so useful for trauma? I mean, I think it's a standout therapy when it comes to the kinds of trauma that's really difficult to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Well,
just define it?
EMDR, as for most types of therapies, nothing's a one size fits all approach. But EMDR basically works like if you have a stress event or you have multiple stress events, it gets trapped in your brain along with the same thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations. And so then when you're in this present life, think about um, certain events might press a button and it's tied to this core event or multiple core events. So you might have all of the same feelings and sensations coming up. And so what EMDR does is it activates both sides of your brain. They think it's similar to what goes on during REM sleep, so that you have the memory, the core memory, and the present, and they're disconnected from each other. So not every, so you can just live your present life. You still remember everything and it's not hypnosis, but it's not as tied to your body. You don't have like this vulnerability of buttons constantly being pressed.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Now, from what I understand about your personal history, I mean, you talked about two really significant events, the death of two people close to you and at different
Mhm.
times, but participating in activities that you love. I mean, like so close to home in so many ways. But can you kind of give us a broader sense of trauma? It's like one of the things that I hear in clinical practice a lot is people sort of disregarding certain kinds of things in life that were maybe acutely stressful because it wasn't a death or something that kind of like hits their concept of what qualifies as trauma. So can you
Mhm.
kind of give us a broader understanding of like what is trauma? And then when people talk about little t trauma, big T trauma, like what the heck does all of that mean?
Yeah, well, I think about trauma as when you have a stress event occur, and for some reason or another, typically it's for our own survival, our body isn't able to complete processing or the process of the event. So if you look at, let's say, a little kid who was never able to express their emotions when they were upset, those are multiple traumas over the course of a lifetime that are never quite able to be completed. Like they can't cry, or maybe they can't run or move or dance or do what their body needs to do to basically process the emotions of that event. In the same way, if we are in a situation, and let's say with the avalanche I was in, and some people got PTSD that were there and some people didn't. And you can't always define exactly why, but there is a degree to which if we feel like we just need to survive, that's kind of takes the forefront, and our bodies can't actually do the completion process of what happened or that memory.
Okay. So what I'm hearing what you're saying is that little or small, what defines something as a trauma is that your body doesn't complete whatever its natural cycle is that would allow it to resolve and let go. And so some part of you almost stays, would it be fair to say, stays stuck there while trying to move forward with life? And so you're simultaneously stuck in the past and attempting to live in the present?
Yeah, and sometimes people do a really good job for a long time of containing it and putting it in this really tight box on the shelf for a long time. So they might not even know that they didn't complete the process until it's actually safe enough in their lives to really look at things and notice what's actually coming up. So if I um, have some really difficult event, but then I'm focused on I need to just make money, I need to eat, um, I need to sleep, I need to find housing, I'm not really going to be able to even look at that event or be close to doing that until I have a safe life in a way.
That's really interesting. It's really insightful clinically. One of the things that I've seen repeatedly and kind of made my best guess about based on the clinical observation is that when people are in healthy, stable relationships, like when their life finally feels like on some level it's working, then all of these symptoms emerge. Then the insomnia happens, then the GI symptoms happen. And
Mm-hmm.
to them, it could be so difficult to put that together. Like, I finally feel better, and then my body fell apart. But what you're saying is that our body won't even start to process some of those emotional events until we have a sort of a sufficient degree of safety.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge level in which our brains and bodies of individuals know when they're ready for it to come up. And there's a separate part where if someone's in crisis stage and they're just very highly activated, that's kind of a different story. We're talking about when we put something away for a long time.
Great. Thank you for helping to illuminate that. Can you talk about how some of these unresolved events end up impacting our health and vitality, whether it's directly or indirectly? I mean, you've talked about these physical symptoms, but one of the things that you and I have also discussed is that sometimes these events impact the way that we view the world, the way we think, the way we
Mhm.
speak to ourselves. And so, yeah, if you could talk about both sides, like the direct impact of the stress in the body, and then also that indirect piece, like if it changes the way you think, then it can change the way you behave, and that can have impacts as well.
So the direct impact on of stress on the body can look different for everyone. Um, I touched on some of the physical symptoms, and I'm sure that you see a lot of those. Some A lot of times physical symptoms can also manifest in people going to the doctors a lot and having really unexplained things and never really having a diagnosis for them. Um, so that's really common. You see a lot of migraines or digestive issues, itching, um, different infections. People will get like random infections that are really bad. Um, as far as how the psychological part manifests, we look at how and who we're closest with at that time, like maybe at that time or in the future, and what stories we might put on relationships or on ourselves. So let's say a person grew up with some neglect and inconsistent caregiving. That little kid might try to make sense to those events and say, oh, well, it's probably my fault, or I'm a bad person, or I'm defective, and this is why this is happening. Um, because that's the only way that they can make sense and move forward in their life. And then maybe they are 20, 30, 40 years old and have someone leave them in a relationship. They're going to immediately go to that story, it's my fault, instead of looking at, well, maybe potentially part of it was my fault, and maybe potentially part of it was this other person's actions, and maybe it wasn't actually that healthy. So that's one way that it can manifest. And it can also, we come up with these negative life stories, and that impacts how we then care for ourselves. So if we grew up with parents or caregivers that made us feel undeserving, maybe we feel like we don't deserve to buy new shoes even though we have bone spurs. Maybe we think we don't deserve a haircut or good food or nice things for ourselves, clothing. So it can look at, like, it can affect how we treat ourselves too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. One of the things that I've seen, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, is um, with weight. Even like one of the things that kind of first clued me into how like negative self-image or beliefs can influence weight, um, is because, when I still lived in Florida, so we're talking about 10 years ago, I worked with a couple of women who, they were willing to change their diet, do the work. They lost the desired amount of weight. And then they went out into the world and got attention that they did not feel comfortable with. It reminded
Mm-hmm.
them of prior incidences, or, for one, it reminded her of getting unwanted attention as a younger person. She had a history of
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse. For another, she was actually still in a tumultuous relationship. And it was like, if this man looks at me, then I have to deal with my jealous husband. And that's very stressful. For both of them, within the next 3 to 4 months, it was like all the weight that they had worked hard to lose was back on.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just had me curious about, some of the self-talk, but then also the extent maybe to which the body feels safer when it's larger. and maybe feels invisible when it's larger. Like in our culture, there is a degree of invisibility granted, to
Mhm.
bodies. There's less sexual pressure and attention, and so I guess I was just curious about your thoughts and like how much of that is conscious, like, oh, this doesn't work, and like I'm gonna go hang out with Ben and Jerry, or if it's just, like that unconscious mind kind of playing out in various ways to leave us feeling safe.
Well, I think for a lot of folks that come into therapy, it really starts off as unconscious. So whether it's weight or hygiene, um, there's this resistance and almost defensiveness when we look at trying to address some of those issues, even though that's in their treatment goals. And for some folks, like the folks that you mentioned, that's a protective measure. So that's that person that's still activated, that still feels like they're under a threat, that still needs to keep themselves safe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So then how do people go about changing some of that talk? Like, is it really about making the unconscious conscious as step one? Or like, you talked about EMDR before. From what I understand, and please clarify me if I'm wrong, there's not necessarily a lot of talk therapy happening with a modality like EMDR. So, what do you see in like, sort of that process of evolution for somebody who's stuck in a particular pattern that's not working for them? And they want to get over to this other side where they have energy, where they have productive relationships, where their body feels like it's working for them. How do you go about that?
So, for a lot of folks that are really stuck, it's often because they've had multiple events that re-establish this negative belief. And so, let's say it's I'm disgusting, or I can only feel safe if I'm disgusting, or something like that. We actually work with the negative belief itself and what sensations they notice in their body as they bring that belief to mind with EMDR. So that's one part of it. Another adjunct, because I like to add different supports into it, is starting some sort of self compassion program, even if people don't believe it. Maybe they're going on a walk and just listening to it and being really curious about it. Um, Taking shame off of even having that belief and working with shame and just inviting the shame with curiosity and a neutral stance. So those are a few of the ways that I go about it.
Okay. So I'm laughing only because each of these occurred to me as like massive steps, right? Like
Mhm.
a compassion plan, inviting the shame. Can you can you give us a sense of like what that might look like for somebody as a daily practice? Like if you don't even realize that you're telling yourself something, and then to go into like, okay, well, I'm telling myself this thing, but it's coming from a part of me that just wants to be safe. And so I'm not going to beat myself up for saying the thing. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, what does it actually look like as a daily practice for somebody who's walking this path?
Well, it depends where people are. So you can start the compassion process if you have an animal or a plant that you really like, or a tree that you really like, and just noticing things that bring a comfortable sensation. So you start with things that are very neutral and you just get into noticing what it is to feel that way about something. So it's not like you start with, I'm going to do an hour of self compassion every day and work on this belief. Because one, that can actually be really activating if you're not ready for it. And two, you have to take things in really small chunks.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful because I think that sometimes people don't start because they don't know where to go. So, Elizabeth, what would be somebody's clue that it's time not just to see? Well, actually, I guess my first question is Is there a difference between therapy and trauma therapy? Like, how would somebody know, oh, I just need to go talk to somebody, or I need to work with somebody that has a specific skill set?
Hmm. I think it depends on their goals and what they want to work on. Um, but sometimes people start with a therapist, and the therapist says, "Hey, you really need trauma therapy." I think if, let me just think about this for a little bit. If you um, kind of take a history taking of yourself, and you might have an increase in chronic pain or tension patterns, somatic pain. If when you're thinking about different stories in your life, you might notice your body language completely shift in some way, shape, or form, or you feel really tired after thinking about it. Those are some clues that maybe you would need trauma therapy. Um, Either way, when I'm working with folks, it's really about establishing a relationship. So it might, just because someone needs trauma therapy, they might not be there for 6 months or a year, and they decide when they want to go there. So you need to have like a really high level of safety too before going there.
Okay. So you said you have to have a high level of safety before going there? Is that
Before going into the trauma with the therapist. So you got to have to be able to trust them,
okay?
um,
I see what you're saying.
and like just trust that no matter what comes up in the experience, that you can both handle it together. I think that's an essential piece.
Okay, got it. And then trauma therapy is distinguished from regular therapy in that you're specifically revisiting those events and then utilizing tools like EMDR or something else from your toolkit to actually desensitize and create space. Is that
Hmm.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
got it. What are some of the shifts that you see in people's life after they're doing this kind of work? Like maybe things that they weren't expecting as they
Hmm.
start to resolve some of those limiting patterns and negative core beliefs.
Well, once you don't have to fight a negative belief, like there's something wrong with me or it's my fault, and you actually truly believe that it's not your fault or there's nothing wrong with you, I'm just saying that because those are common beliefs. A lot of folks will notice in their career, maybe they're advocating for themselves more. Maybe they're doing more things for themselves. Maybe they're asking for a pay raise or investing in a hobby that they thought they didn't deserve because it was a waste of time. So I think it can ripple into the creative parts of our life, our career, relationship with kids, family, loved ones. And actually, sometimes it can cause, because everyone's within a system, if all of a sudden they change their belief, but their family was really used to them having this belief, it can cause some disruption to that system for a little while. If that person is advocating for themselves more or no longer trying to be responsible for everyone's emotions and people please, the environment around them sometimes gets worse before it gets better because that has to adapt too.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that. I say to a lot of patients, the people who will resist you developing boundaries are the people who really benefited from your not having them.
Big time.
You
Yeah.
know, and so sometimes I think the people closest to us and in our inner circle, even though I mean, they might love and care for us, but sometimes they can be the anchor that, prevents some of that movement. Because, like you said, they're used to you being a particular way. And as you start to shift, it can disrupt the whole system.
Hmm.
It's still really worth doing.
It's still really worth doing to get out of it.
As I kind of bring us back around to this central theme of the interview series, which is the idea that you cannot hate yourself into health and happiness, and that, restriction, deprivation, suffering, like this is not the way forward. And I think you've demonstrated it so well already that like a lot of times that's just all of that restriction and deprivation and suffering, I would imagine, is playing out some of those limiting beliefs and negative beliefs that come from these unresolved events in our life. But as you get, like I said, as you think about this idea that you can't hate yourself into health and happiness, is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation based on your experience as a therapist, working with trauma, whether it's your own or with other people's, but just to kind of leave people with so that they can stop trying to beat themselves up into joy?
Um, well, there are a lot of the talk around trauma is that it's based upon specific life events or how we grew up. But another element to think about is like the socio-cultural elements of it, and some of it's generational. So I come from family of immigrants, and even though it's 2 generations back, there is this element that you need to suffer and work hard and sacrifice in order to be happy. And so if people aren't doing that, then they don't deserve happiness in some way, shape, or form. So I think we also have to think about how the culture that we came from can influence these beliefs. And the other important component is we made these beliefs to survive and to get to where we are today. So at some point, they really, really helped us. And they were hugely instrumental in just being human and getting to where we are. And so it's not bad that we might have a negative belief. It actually is good and it's helped us a lot, but we don't necessarily need to have it the rest of our life.
That's great thought. It's really, I think, illustrates how adaptive becomes maladaptive over
Mm-hmm.
time, right? And all of these habits that we picked up, like we picked them up because they worked. How do we know that
Yeah,
they worked? Because you're here.
right.
That doesn't mean that you have to do it for the rest of your life. Yeah. So great. That's really helpful. I also actually really appreciate that kind of generational background. I mean, like my father moved to the United States in his 20s, and sort of like that mix of cultural beliefs. It does play a role. I think that generational trauma is real. Another thing that I see is even the inherited ideas of like somebody whose grandparents grew up in the Great Depression, and they have that like you need to eat everything on your plate
Right.
mentality, played out in the person who's struggling with diabetes, or obesity. But like sometimes it's just sort of these unconsciously held patterns and beliefs that are playing out. And I think that when we can bring them to the surface and examine them through the lens of compassion, it gives us access to choice.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for illuminating all of this. It was really helpful, really insightful, and I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing the events of your life that led you on this path. I'm grateful for
Yeah.
the work that you do.
Thanks for having me.